Hello everyone and welcome to this Meanwhile Elsewhere on the topic of the Crusades. I'm just going to give you a little bit more in-depth knowledge about the key concept of the Crusades whilst you're also learning about the story of Eleanor of Aquitaine and what that tells you about who held power in the Middle Ages. The main historical concepts that we're going to focus on in this learning are the word crusade, which was, in this context, a religious war designed to take control of Jerusalem or parts of the Holy Land from Islamic control and make sure that it was controlled by Christians. Empire is when one country controls other countries, such as the Roman Empire, British Empire, Mughal Empire. We've also talked about the Angevin Empire as well in our inquiry. Holy Land, an area of land in the Middle East where the events of the Bible happened, includes places like Jerusalem, for example. Jerusalem is a city in the Middle East. There are holy sites there for Judaism, Christianity and Islam. And the Pope, in this context, in the Middle Ages, was the leader of the church. Today it refers to the leader of the Catholic Church. So here is a map of some of the Crusades. So you can see here that the Crusades left Europe from places like France, for example. King Richard the Lionheart was involved in this from the point of view of England during this time. And you can see some of the different routes that they took. And in terms of the geography down there, you can see just in the sort of like bottom right hand corner, you've got some cities like Jerusalem, Acre, Damascus, Tripoli, Antioch, Edessa, which you find out about when we're learning about the Second Crusade with Louis VII and Eleanor of Aquitaine. So we've got lots of different information that we can see there, and some of the different routes that people took during this time period on the Crusades. So this gives you a timeline of the Crusades. So whilst we looked at the Second Crusade when we were studying Eleanor of Aquitaine, it's important to know that the Crusades span the time period of the 11th, 12th and 13th centuries, and they very much kind of dominate warfare during this time of the Middle Ages. So there are 7 different Crusades and also the Children's Crusade, which took place in 1212, which we'll talk briefly about as well within this presentation. So what were the Crusades? Well, in the medieval era, there were several crusades that were made by people from European Christian countries. Now, the Crusaders believed they were carrying out God's work by taking part in military campaigns to reclaim the Holy Land for Christianity. And they followed the wishes of the Pope, who was the head of the Catholic Church. Now, in 1095, Pope Urban II, at the Council of Clermont, called on Christians in Europe to go on crusade to reclaim the Holy Land. And this was because Islamic control of this area had increased markedly towards the end of the 11th century, and the Pope was concerned that Christians weren't able to go to the Holy Land on Christian pilgrimages. People who went on the Crusades were motivated by lots of different reasons, including the prospects of wealth, freedom, and power. Now, Jerusalem in particular was the most important city within the Holy Land, and it was an important place for all the Abrahamic faiths, so for Christianity, Islam, and Judaism. So for Christians, Jerusalem is the place they believe Jesus died and was buried, so Christian pilgrims had visited the city for centuries. For Muslims, Jerusalem is a holy site where they believe the Prophet Muhammad ascended to heaven. Arab Muslims conquered the Holy Land in 638. The Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque are sites of pilgrimage for Muslims. And for Jewish people, Jerusalem is important as it's seen as the center of the world. It's believed to be the site where Abraham, founder of the Jewish religion, was prepared to sacrifice his son Isaac as God tested his devotion to his faith. And it's also got some really, really important sites for Jewish people, which we'll look at on the next slide. So we can see here an image of the city of Jerusalem, and we can see there that the Wailing or Western Wall is the last part of King Herod's temple and is a site of pilgrimage for Jewish people. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre is built on the site where Christians believe that Jesus was buried, and the Dome of the Rock Mosque is built on the site where Muslims believe the Prophet Muhammad rose up and visited heaven. So there's lots and lots of really important sites for Christians, Jewish people, and Muslims in Jerusalem. So you can see why this was such an important place within the Holy Land. Okay, so why did people go on crusade? Well, there's an artistic interpretation of Peter the Hermit preaching for people to go on crusade. And the influence of preachers and also the Pope was an important reason why people went on crusade. And in fact, if you read that extract from Pope Urban II's speech in 1095, you can start to understand what kind of motivated many people to go on crusade. And this is what Pope Urban II said. He said, "I speak as a messenger from God. You must hasten to help your brothers in the East. The Turkish Muslims have seized more and more of the lands of the Christians, have defeated them 7 times in many battles, killed or captured many people, destroyed churches, and devastated the kingdom of God. In the name of God, set out for Jerusalem. Take the land and make it your own. If you die on a journey or in battle, your sins will be forgiven immediately. God himself has given me the power to say this. So the influence of the Pope and various preachers like Peter the Hermit persuaded many to go on crusade. Some people, though, went on crusade to make themselves wealthy and claim land for themselves. Some went on crusade as a more of a push factor to escape their own land, and some were criminals or in trouble, for example, said reasons for wanting to leave. Some simply went for a sense of adventure and a sense to kind of get away and sort of travel the world. Most who made the journey were rich noblemen who believed that fighting in a crusade would make them closer to God. But it's important to know that ordinary people also took part, either as foot soldiers. Remember, they wouldn't have been able to afford all the expensive equipment like horses, like the rich people did. And also non-combatants went, people who weren't fighting but kind of went as a type of pilgrimage. They were also religious, and some hoped it would lead to God forgiving their sins. Here's an overview of the different crusades. So the first crusade was obviously inspired by Pope Urban II and involved people like Geoffrey of Bouillon, Raymond IV of Toulouse, and Baldwin of Boulogne. And the objective was to reclaim Jerusalem from Muslim control and secure Christian access to the Holy Land. And this led to the successful capture of Jerusalem by the Crusaders in 1099. The Second Crusade involved King Louis VII of France. We know Eleanor of Aquitaine was there, Emperor Conrad III of Germany. And the aim was to regain lost territory, including the city of Edessa, and protect the Holy Land. But it ended in disappointment and failure with no significant gains of lands. The Third Crusade involved King Richard I, Richard the Lionheart, King Philip II of France, and Saladin, who was a Muslim leader. And the objective for the Third Crusade was to reclaim Jerusalem from Saladin, who had recaptured the city, and defend Christian kingdoms in the Holy Land. It was partially successful, but a truce was reached allowing Christians access to Jerusalem. But the Crusaders did not get full control of Jerusalem or conquer it. And in the Fourth Crusade, key people were Pope Innocent III and Enrico Dandolo, who was a leader from Venice, known as a Venetian Doge. The objective was to capture Jerusalem, but it diverted to Constantinople, leading to the sack and sort of destroying of large parts of the city of Constantinople. The outcome was that it weakened what was known as the Byzantine Empire, causing lasting tension in Christian and Islamic relations. Now, the Children's Crusade took place in 1212. Key people were Nicholas Cologne and Stephen of Cloy. This was a largely symbolic movement of young people seeking to peacefully convert Muslims to Christianity. It mostly ended in tragedy, with many children dying or being sold into slavery. The Fifth Crusade involved King Andrew II of Hungary, John of Brienne, who was the regent of Jerusalem. It targeted the Ayyubid dynasty in Egypt to regain control of Jerusalem. There were some territorial concessions, but Jerusalem was not retaken. The Sixth Crusade involved the Holy Roman Emperor, Frederick II, and the objective again was to gain more control and influence in Jerusalem. Frederick II negotiated Jerusalem's return without any significant military action. And then the Seventh Crusade, King Louis IX of France, involved El Muazzam Turanshah, known as Ayyubid Sultan, and the objective was the reconquest of Jerusalem, but it ended with the defeat of Louis IX in Egypt, and that was unsuccessful. Louis IX was defeated, he was captured and later released. There was no gain of land, and a little bit later on, the capture of Acre in 1291, we can see an artist's painting of the siege of Acre from the 19th century, generally marks the end of the Crusades in the late 13th century. So just a little bit more of a focus on Saladin and the Third Crusade, and just to enhance our understanding of Richard the Lionheart. So in 1171, a new Muslim leader called Saladin came to power in Egypt. He defeated many crusaders, and in October 1187, he captured Jerusalem. Saladin had allowed Christians and Jews to worship freely, but many Christian leaders sought to recapture Jerusalem. This led to the Third Crusade, and it involved King Richard I of England. However, Saladin defended Jerusalem well, and the Crusaders failed to take the city. A truce was agreed between the two sides, so Christian pilgrims could visit the holy site. And you can see there an artistic interpretation of King Richard I, known as Richard the Lionheart, on his way to the Third Crusade, and an artistic interpretation of Saladin there. So here's a little map of the Third Crusade, and just give you a little bit more information about the different people involved and some of the maps there and the routes that they took, just to find out a little bit more information about that. Now, the Crusades are historically significant, not just for religious reasons, they were also politically significant. European rulers from places such as France, Germany, and England hoped that success in the Crusades would secure their power and legacy as a successful military leader. Remember, Richard the Lionheart was heavily involved in the Crusades and only spent probably around about 6 months of his 10-year rule of England actually in England. He was much more preoccupied with going to the Holy Land and involved in military expeditions. And of course, we found out as well about how he was captured in Austria and ransomed as well, Richard the Lionheart. The Crusades were encouraged and supported by various popes, so leaders believed they were doing God's work in fighting for control of the Holy Land. The Crusades were also economically significant. They opened up new opportunities for trade. Crusaders brought back new spices and textiles from the Holy Land and the wider Islamic world. New trade routes were established, meaning more goods could be bought and sold both across Europe and with the Middle East. So it had that significant aspect to it as well. So thank you for listening to that Meanwhile Elsewhere, all about the Crusades. Bye-bye.